following video is not made for kids. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello to my subscribers, this is the TFN coming to what will hopefully be a short and successful Transformers review. And today we're going to be taking a look at one of the Transformers action figures that, continuing the trend with the previous figure I reviewed of Legacy Armada Hotshot, I originally wasn't going to get this figure. I was going to pass on it entirely, but then when push came to shove, I finally found the figure at a decent enough price, so I figured why not add it to my Transformers collection. So here it is. This is the Transformers Legacy Velocitron Speedia 500 collection deluxe class Autobot Blurr. Boy, what a mouthful that was to say. So to shorten it, this is the Transformers Velocitron Blurr. The figure itself is a retool of the Transformers Studio Series 86 Blurr figure that was released back in 2021. This figure was technically released for the first time last year in 2022, and one of the reasons that finally motivated me to get Blurr is because he is the last of the Velocitron 500 Wave 1 figure that I still had to add to my collection. I got all of the other Velocitron 500 Speedia 500 collection figures released in the first wave already added to my Transformers collection. I'm debating whether or not if I'll do a collection video showing off all of the Velocitron Wave 1 figures, since adding Blurr finally to my collection made me go completist on Wave 1 of the Velocitron set. I don't have every single one of the Velocitron 500 figures that's been released. I do not have Shadow Strip, aka Generation 2 Drag Strip. Yeah, but bringing focus here back to Blurr, what makes this version of Blurr unique compared to the Studio Series 86 figure that he's retooled from is that this is based on Blurr's appearance in IDW's comic books. He's got his head sculpt from IDW's comic books, which is a very different head sculpt that he had from the G1 cartoon show. So if you're on the top of the box, you've got some images of his vehicle mode. You got an image of it there on the top up portion, and you got it here on the overhead. And it's from different angles. The artwork of Blurr in his robot mode comes around here to the side. The close-up of that artwork, there's his IDW head sculpt. Well then, yes, I'd say about between a third to half of the figure has newly sculpted parts, while the other half of the figure has the same parts used on the Studio Series 86 Blurr figure. On here to the back of the box, you've got your product photos. You got Blurr in his robot mode and his vehicle mode. He transforms back and forth between both modes in just 15 steps. And yes, this is just a very minor nitpick, but the black wheels that Blurr has on the front of his vehicle mode, they're right here on the side of the box. Unfortunately, they do not spin at all. They're just that noise you're hearing me is my fingernail actually scratching on the sculpted ridges on the edges of the tires. So I would think it would have been fun if those wheels could actually spin around, but they're just sculpted in there, and so basically the wheels are just hood ornaments. That's a real shame, because when you look here on the artwork here on the top of the box of Blurr's vehicle mode, they're supposed to be actual wheels that spin around. And so I think it's a shame that those wheels are just sculpted circles on the front bumper of Blurr's alt mode, and not actual functioning wheels. But that's just a minor gripe I have with the figure. But yes, overall, the figure is based on it's fairly accurate to Blurr's appearance in IDW's comic books. The paint job, the head sculpt of the robot mode, and the front section of the vehicle mode, it's all IDW Blurr through and through, and that's why that's very distinct. That's enough of an extinction from the original Studio Series 86 Blurr figure that this is basically Blurr from the IDW universe instead of the Generation 1 universe. So without further delay, let's get Blurr out of his box and take a close look at him at the mode that he comes packaged in, which is his alt mode. Before I babble on any further. Alright, so here is Velocitron Blurr out of the box, transformed into his alt mode, which is the mode he comes packaged in. And looking at it in the figure in hand, I can kind of see why these wheels are stationary and they are non-functioning. It's because they can't even touch the ground. But again, that's my biggest gripe with Blurr's alt mode, is that these wheels do not function properly. Just like Studio Series 86 Blurr, the only real weapon storage for his laser gun and his fuel tank is gas, gasoline canister, I guess you could call it, is just having it sticking off the front and acting as a front cannon for the alt mode. You can remove these if you want. Not having them attached technically gives the figure more of an IDW accurate appearance, but it's all personal preference on how you want to display the figure, and even if you do want to display it in alt mode. So for quick size comparison, here is Velocitron Blurr next to Studio Series 86 Blurr. One thing you can do if you want, just to further distinguish them from each other, is you can attach the main laser gun. You can attach it facing opposite directions, so when you line them beside each other, the laser guns look almost like mirror images of each other if you want to just try and further distinguish the figures. Pretty much the only parts of the figures that are brand new sculpted is the front half. The front hood section is entirely brand new on the Velocitron figure. The cockpits are the same. The racing spoiler, the racing fin on the top back is the same. The back middle of the vehicle mode is the same. The one part that is different is the back sides of the vehicle. They are the same. This part that's this like silver that has the silver circle on Velocitron Blurr. It's got this triangle. Oh, here on Studio Series 86 Blurr, the thrusters on the back of the vehicle, on the back of the vehicle mode, I believe they are the same head sculpt, and it's basically the outside back ends of the vehicle mode that are different. These basically end up becoming the robot mode shoulders, so those are sculpted differently. So pretty much about half of the figure is the same sculpt, and the other half of the figure is brand new molding. From the bottom, the robot mode parts, the parts on Blurr that are white, which are light blue on Velocitron Blurr, those are pretty much the same. And the parts on the underside of the vehicle mode, the parts here on Velocitron Blurr that are done in this dark blue, they're the same sculpted material that's used on Studio Series 86 Blurr. It's just hard to further distinguish due to being the same shades, but yeah, that's pretty much it. When you line them up evenly together, the longer nose on Studio Series 86 Blurr does make the laser gun stick out slightly farther. So when even without the laser guns being attached, when you line them up from back to back, the front middle of the nose cone on Studio Series 86 or G1 Blurr does make his vehicle mode longer than Velocitron IDW Blurr. But it is nice. But it is enough of a distinction to make you realize that even though it's not a brand new character, it is Blurr from a different universe. And because the laser guns are the exact same, you can swap the laser guns if you desire. So here's what they look like with each other's laser guns attached. The fuel tank on Studio Series 86 Blurr, it does not want to clip on as securely to Velocitron Blurr as it does on this one. But if you want Blurr to have a laser gun that doesn't quite match up with the shade of blue that he's made of, it's a slightly brighter shade of blue. My camera can't distinguish it, but when you have it in hand, you can see the difference. The shade of blue plastic that's used here on Studio Series 86 Blurr, it's more of like a sky blue, and the light blue that's used here on Velocitron IDW Blurr, it has it's almost like a very light aqua blue. But I won't go into too much of the different shades of difference here. Just know that it's not a perfect matchup. So, but yes, pretty much. This is one of the reasons why I didn't get this figure for such a long time. I mean, why this was the last Velocitron Wave 1 figure I added to my collection, because if you like the Studio Series 86 Blurr and you're fine having a version of Blurr that's completely Generation 1 accurate, then the Velocitron Blurr, being based on IDW Blurr, it can be an easy pass. Now that we've looked at them in vehicle mode, let's get them transformed into robot mode, do a quick size comparison, and we'll wrap up the review on Blurr. Alright, and here is Velocitron Blurr transformed into his robot mode. Again, the figure is based on his appearance in IDW's comic books. I won't go into the articulation too much. It's pretty basic. You got a ball joint in the head so it can rotate clockwise and left and right 360 degrees. It can look up and down about a millimeter of an angle. Heavy ratchet joints in the arms, but they can swivel forward and backwards 360 degrees. Technically, you don't have a swivel joint in the bicep, but you have one right above the elbow, and then you have a hinge joint at the elbow. No real wrist articulation due to the armor kibble here actually attached to the base of the wrist on the hand, so just be careful with that. And swivel joint in the waist, so the figure can rotate 360 degrees clockwise and counterclockwise at the waist. Legs can go out this far, so you can do the full splits. Universal jointed hips, the legs can go forward this far, they can go backwards that far. Alright, swivel joint at the base of the hip hinge knees, and you do have ankle rockers, but due to the leg armor sitting level with the heels trying to get the figure into a sprawl-legged pose can be a bit of a challenge. But overall, really nice interpretation of Blurr. I really dig the smiling face on his head sculpt. I can't remember too much about how Blurr was portrayed in IDW's comic books, but it wasn't like some other Transformers characters in IDW where they made the characters completely different from how they were portrayed in past series, such as RC and Star Saber, or even Ultra Magnus or Megatron. But Blurr's appearance in IDW's comic books, it is distinctive enough that he is it is a entirely different iteration of Blurr compared to his Generation 1 counterpart. So for a quick size comparison, here is Velocitron Blurr next to his the figure he's repainted and retooled from, Studio Series 86 Blurr. So this is Generation 1 Blurr, this is IDW Blurr, G1 cartoon, IDW's comic books, 1986. I can't remember what year Blurr was introduced in IDW, if it was 2006 or 2007, but he was one of the first characters to be introduced in IDW's comic books. The reason I know that is because in the original Transformers Generations line back in 2010, and the first modern day Generation style action figure Blurr that was released, it was a repaint and retool of the Transformers Generations 2010 Autobot drift figure. But that version of Blurr that was released, I think it actually wasn't released until 2011, but the first ever modern day action figure of Blurr, it was a mashup of both his IDW and Generation 1 version, and it had the head sculpt that this version has, not this one over here. I apologize for not bringing that figure of Blurr out for another size comparison, but it's in a storage bin with a bunch of other Transformers characters, and it would have been difficult for me to find and pull it out. But yeah, here's these two figures standing side by side with each other. Again, the differences are the head sculpt, the upper half of the robot mode arms are different on both versions of Blurr. The kibble that hangs off the base of the arms is different. The hood of the vehicle mode, which ends up becoming the robot mode backpack, is new sculpted detailing. They do have different waists based on there, so they do have different pelvises, but that's pretty much it. The actual elbow joint itself with the rocket boosters from alt mode, that is the same sculpt on both versions of Blurr. I believe the elbow joints themselves are the same. Yeah, they are. They're just different colors. From the pelvis down, and the legs are the exact same sculpt on both figures. There's no retool parts on any of those. The center of the robot mode torso, including the windshield that becomes the robot mode chest, that's the same on both versions of Blurr. So yes, the Velocitron Blurr, pretty much 50% of the figure is brand new sculpting, while the other 50% of the figure is the same thing you get with Studio Series 86 Blurr, so it's distinguished enough that it is a different version of Blurr, but not an entirely different character. If you wanted to try and distinguish these from each other, you could. If you wanted to make Velocitron Blurr a different character from Studio Series 86 Blurr, or if you desire, there are a handful of action figures that have been released in the past that have been e-paints of action figures of Blurr that have been released, so there are a couple of names out there that exist if you wanted to try and just make this a different character, so you could have both of these standing side by side with each other and not have them be Blurr from different universes. But overall, it is a nice representation of the IDW version of Blurr. One nice thing is that unlike the Studio Series 86 Blurr, who I believe he doesn't have any actual Autobot logos found on him, Velocitron Blurr has an Autobot logo there on the center of his chest, so that is nice to see. And of course, you could switch the weapons and place them in other hands if you wanted to further distinguish these two figures from each other. But overall, now that I finally have it in hand, I can see it for what it is, being a distinguished action figure of Blurr, or for at least distinguished enough for being a retool of a previously released action figure of Blurr. So, to wrap up the video, to answer the proverbial question, do I recommend you get the Legacy Velocitron Speedia 500 Deluxe Class Autobot Blurr figure and add it to your Transformers collection? I only recommend you get the figure if you're a fan of Blurr and if you're a fan of IDW's comic books. If you're a fan of just one of those, or if you're a fan of neither of those, then this figure can be an easy pass. From what I've seen on eBay, which is where I got Velocitron Blurr, it's where I've got, eBay's the website where I've gotten all of my Velocitron Transformers figures, since I don't have any Walmart stores where I live. Blurr's out of all the deluxe class figures, Blurr's the one that's going for the cheapest amount, and I believe out of all of the Velocitron figures, Blurr, I believe, is the one who's going for the cheapest price. I found him going for cheaper prices than even Road Rocket and Burnout, some of the other shelf-warming Velocitron action figures. But yeah, if you aren't really too much into Blurr, then this figure can be an easy pass, but if you want to go completist on the Velocitron Speedia 500 collection line, then I do recommend you get this figure. I recommend getting the figure even if you already have the Studio Series 86 Blurr. I have to say, yes, I do, because again, this is Blurr based on his appearance in IDW's comic book, so it's a different version of Blurr enough that you can distinguish it from the Studio Series 86 figure. Thank you guys all so much for watching. This has been the TFangy. This has been my review on one of the Transformers action figures that I was the least anxious to add to my Transformers collection, so much so that I believe it's been roughly 6 months since this figure was released for the first time, and I finally added it to my collection. So this has been Transformers Legacy Velocitron Speedia 500 Deluxe Class IDW Blurr. If you're a fan of Blurr, then I recommend you get this figure. If you're not and you already have the Studio Series 86 Blurr figure, then the Velocitron figure can be an easy pass. So thank you guys all so much for watching. This has been the TFangy. Until next time, you guys, stay safe, stay healthy. Transformers roll out. Goodbye, everyone.